Welcome back to the West Virginia University Communication Studies Massive Open Online course. My name is Dr. Nick Bowman. I'm a professor here in the Department of Communication Studies. And this week I've been hosting some discussions on what we call CMC, or Computer Mediated Communication. Specifically, what I've been talking about is how we can understand the role that communication technologies play in our social and our professional lives. So yesterday, on February 4th, 2013, I talked a little bit about the very definition of CMC, and I spoke for a little bit about the goals you might think of. And one of my main points was that communication is goal-oriented. And because of that, whether we communicate through technology or through other devices or through ourselves and our person and our face-to-face interactions, you have to study communication for what it is. And today, I'm going to speak a little more about that notion of communication and how we understand communication and how we understand technology communication. Then I'm also going to talk a bit about what it means in terms of our current social systems. And one of the things I always like to point out is this notion of whether or not we need communication technology. So this graphic up here talks about, prior to smartphone days, people would say often, I don't need to be connected all the time. I want to get away and unplug from the world and do those things. And certainly, I think we still do them today. I like to vacation and go camping and get out in the mountains and get away from the world for a couple days. But that being said, it was very easy for us to reject connectivity when we couldn't have it. If you think of a landline telephone, for you to use the phone, you had to be home at a certain space and a certain time frame to make phone calls. And that was very frustrating. You had to schedule your day. If anybody ever waited for a phone call from college, we had to schedule our days around trying to get a hold of somebody or not getting a hold of somebody. And you had to rush home and grab your phone and then leave when your phone call was over. And, you were sort of a slave to your technology in order for you to get things done. Yet, fast forward to smartphone, and once you purchase a smartphone, and we want you. We want everybody all the time. We're sharing more information and more connectivity than ever before. And it's not that we're addicted to the technology, although this graphic certainly suggests that I am in love with my phone. But what it might suggest is that we do want connectivity, or rather we want the option of being connected. And so I'm going to talk about sort of both sides of the scale, and that it might well be the case now that we have the tool available for us to remain connected, and why that might be a good thing for us, or at least understanding why folks enjoy that connectivity. So today, I'll talk about tools, I'll talk about the internet as a shared social space, and I'll finally talk about the tools of that space, being the tools of communication technology. And what I hope you leave today with is a better understanding of sort of at the macro societal level what technology does for our social spaces, that place that we live in. And even that word place becomes sort of interesting because places aren't always physical anymore. So, as I said on the last discussion, CMC technologies, computer mediated communication technologies, are tools to help us meet our communication goals. That, as I've often argued, and as many communication scholars argue, communication is a functional goal-based process. It's a way by which we stimulate meaning in the mind of another, and we try to get that meaning to match up with what our communication intentions are. So often we can understand communication sort of broadly in terms of 4 goals. I might communicate to get information, right? I read the newspaper so I understand what's going on in the world, or I tell people something so they know what's going on in my world. Relationships, you want to form relationships with each other. A big part of being human, a big part of being in a society is forming relationships, be they romantic or friendships or work relationships, but we have to have those social connections. We use communication technology to persuade each other and to be persuaded. And we use these signals and signs and messages so that we can try to align the world with how we see it, or so that we can understand our world so we can better align ourselves with it. And then finally, entertainment. And we should never ignore the fact that a major central function of our social lives is one of leisure, that time when we're no longer working and we're no longer sleeping and preserving ourselves. We do have this, what I think Clay Shirky calls it, a cognitive surplus, where we have this energy left over, and it's the time that we get to ourselves to kind of explore our humanity. And these 4 things combined largely constitute communication goals and why we communicate. So I want to review that very quickly before we go into the next parts of the discussion, because it's very important to realize that we communicate for different goals at different times, and then different tools can communicate these things better or worse. Okay? Again, it's all about a functional process with a lot of moving parts. So let's look at an example of the CMC debate, because one of the things we see is people arguing that this new technology is hurting us. Right? You hear it all the time with video games and violence in the news lately about how video games that have violent messages are causing us to be violent people, and it's the medium causing the violence. Or one of my personal interests as a research interest and as a professor myself is Facebook. You hear lots of debate about Facebook in the classroom. So I'm going to use this example not because I'm talking to you about education, but I think it highlights a very important element of our discussions about how communication technology is shaping our social lives. So if you're an educator, I think you'll like the discussion. If you just want to follow along, I think you'll understand how this particular example relates into our larger discussion. And by the way, as with this chart and all the charts and images in my PowerPoints, they will take you to extra resources. For example, this here was some research by Dr. Ray Junko, and he's an education and communication scholar who was looking at, he's very interested in how technology is influencing the learning process. And so he did a study in 2010 looking at a lot of things, but one of the data points he pulled out is how much time do students spend on Facebook and minutes per day. And he found that first semester freshmen spend almost 2 hours a day on Facebook. Sophomores spend almost 2 hours a day. And then you get to the juniors and it drops off to about an hour and a half a day. And of course, by the time you get to the seniors, it's about 80 minutes a day. And he was just trying to understand how students and their technology might influence their learning processes, their social processes, and things of that nature. By the way, this graph follows very well with what we understand about media in general. We do tend to see that younger people use more media than older people, and college is about the age at which television viewership drops off, radio listening drops off, a lot of those things, mainly because, well, we're busy preparing ourselves for the world. But let's look at this, because you figure that some of this Facebook usage is going to be during class. Right? Students walk in with a laptop, they open their laptop up, and they're on Facebook. And for any of you who work in an office environment, you catch people using Facebook on their mobile phone during meetings. If you're having dinner with your family, you've got one of the children or your husband or your wife or your partner pulls up their cell phone and looks over Facebook during the meal. And you look at first dates, you see this. And in general, because we like Facebook, we use Facebook a lot, people are often wondering, is Facebook ruining us? Because we're paying more attention to Facebook than we are to our surroundings. And of course, in an educational environment, it means you're not taking your studies seriously. Okay, so some folks might say Facebook is bad because if a student's on Facebook, they're distracted, right? They're not listening to their professor. They're not paying attention to the class. Okay, so that's one conclusion that could be drawn. Students are distracted, their grades suffer. One of them is this notion of time displacement, that if a student's using Facebook in class, they physically don't have the time to be doing other things. So whether it's in class or out of class, 2 hours on Facebook means that's 2 hours you weren't doing your homework. That's 2 hours you weren't reading. That's 2 hours you weren't socializing. Maybe that was just 2 hours you were sitting in your room just clicking around on Facebook. Or perhaps it's the case that Facebook is bad because it introduces social noise. I talked about this in the last presentation, that it starts giving us so much information about our surroundings and about our world that we got to process all that information. And if we're paying more attention to who's dating who and who's cheating who, that means we can't pay attention to what's happening on campus. And in fact, there are some studies that show that the more a student uses Facebook in general, they tend to suffer on their grades. We see a lot of studies in the news in the workplace about employers who use social media waste billions of dollars a year, right? During the NCAA March Madness basketball tournament, there's all these studies that come out about workplace productivity that gets killed because people who are supposed to be working are on their computers checking their, watching the NCAA tournament, making their brackets. And so Facebook is bad, technology is bad. Technology is taking us away from our world. Okay, fine. Those are all logical arguments, but what about the other side? Couldn't Facebook be good? One example, this is from my own research here in the Department of Communication Studies. I find that students who use Facebook to join a class-specific Facebook page do better in grades. In fact, the last study we had presented at a conference last year, and it's currently out for publication. Students who were on the Facebook page in our class scored about 6 percentage points higher on their final exams. They actually they were more connected with the material. To sort of go in reverse here. They were more connected with each other and their instructor. And how could this happen? Well, what I argued is that the Facebook page that was class-specific, the Communication Studies class Facebook page, it gave the students a persistent classroom. So when they had to go learn the material, it wasn't just Tuesday and Thursday from 11:30 to 12:45. They weren't restricted to the space being Armstrong Hall in Morgantown, West Virginia, and the time 11:30 a.m. to 12:45 p.m., which, by the way, takes place during lunch, so students get hungry, they don't pay attention as much. Rather, it made the classroom persistent, just like the smartphone in our earlier example allowed that woman to talk to her friends and family whenever she wanted to. Students could engage the course material on their own time. Now, I want them to engage me as well, but it made the classroom persistent. When they left the building for the day, the classroom didn't shut down, it stayed on. So they had contact with the material on demand. At 3 o'clock in the morning, a student could go to the Facebook page, read class material, and post questions. They were able to connect with each other. Students in a class of 349 students have a very difficult time making connections. And maybe it's not important. You come to the class, you sit down, you take your lecture notes, and you let it go. Okay, fine, but if you can get to know each other, you can form study groups. You can ask each other questions. Sometimes students reported that they felt like they were part of a class, so they actually came to the regular class more often. We found students that were in the Facebook group came to class more often. And then finally, they were connected with me as the instructor. They felt that they could ask me questions online. So it wasn't just come to Dr. Bowman's office hours, 2 hours a week over at Armstrong Hall. It was Dr. Bowman's online, and we'll send him messages, and he might respond to those messages. So Facebook in this situation proved to be a very good technology, and in fact, I've adopted Facebook pages for all of my West Virginia University classes, and it's part of the reason why I'm doing this MOOC, this massive open online course. It creates this persistent space to study contemporary issues. So what I'm going to pose to you when we get into the discussion boards later on today, and as I get on Twitter throughout the week and you guys interact with me, what are your thoughts? You know, the up or down, thumbs up, thumbs down, is Facebook good or bad? And of course, how might you apply this beyond an educational setting? I think a natural corollary is going to be the workplace. Employers using Facebook at work. Because let's face it, social information is not task information. That being said, what if your employees are closer to each other as a result of being on Facebook? Or what if you do some of the research like it's been done by Dr. Leonard Reinke in Germany, and he finds that people who get a break at work, whether it's through Facebook or through a video game, have higher levels of vitality. It's basically their smoke break, and they hop online, read some stuff, and get back to the workplace. Of course, on the flip side, what if they're using it to track their cheating husband, right? That's probably going to make them work less efficiently. So, and of course, remember in all of this discussion, there's a very big point that I haven't brought up, and it's going to be on this next slide here. Machines are not good or bad. There's an author, Colin McCann, who wrote a book called Let the Great World Spin. You can read all about it on this Amazon link. And by the way, Mr. McCann is not sponsoring any of this. It's just a book I really enjoy, and I have my students read. And it was written to take place in the 1970s, 1980s, during some some unsettling political times in the United States and worldwide. And there's this great quote. There was a battle going on with peace protesters who were trying to break into their machines. But it was not the machines they were evil, he said, but the minds of the top brass behind them. A machine could do no more evil than a violin or a camera or a pencil. Now, I'll let you read Column's book to understand the entire plot line, but basically what happens here is these revolutionaries want to take down the political machine and the physical machine, right? And in doing that, they forget something, that technology, machines, computers are not inherently good or evil. You know, without getting too much into the current gun debate in the United States, a common debate happens, is a gun itself inherently good or inherently evil? And the answer from a functional tool perspective is no. It's just a tool. It's a tool that can be used to hurt another human being. It can also be used to find food for your family in the woods, and all the things in between there. And so I really want to continue to encourage you to think about this notion of technology as tool-based, as functional-based. And it's really the people. In this case, it was the top brass behind the political machines, behind the physical machines. The machines themselves don't have a thought in this process. And I want you to consider that Facebook can't be evil. It's a tool. It's a social tool that's meant to bring us closer together. The student can go on Facebook, and they can use it to talk to their professor and ask questions about a class, and probably do very well. That same student could go on Facebook and completely ignore class and flirt with their girlfriend and send nude photos of themselves to somebody else, and they probably won't do very well in the class. But what does that say about technology? You know, and it's this notion of the potential versus the, the cost and the benefits of these programs. So I really enjoy this quote, and I hope you think on this as we get into our discussions online, starting with Facebook and going to other technologies. The other half of today, I want to talk about this notion of social media as a shared space. And if you see I highlighted this map over here, you can click on this map in a minute, I'll explain it. Then look, if social media is all goal-driven, and we think of goals as being individual goals, individual people have a goal they want to achieve, how can we trust anybody? How could it be the case that we trust anybody? Because don't we all have individual goals? And are those goals things that society shares? Or are they things that we share? There's a notion of egocentrism, and for the most part, when we say someone's egocentric, we simply mean they're doing things in their best benefit, which is what most of us do all the time. It's the prime directive to ensure our own survival and our own goals. So a lot of folks compare the internet to the wild, wild west, and they say, my gosh, we go on this network and everybody's doing their own thing with their own rules, and they're just trying to get by on their own. So how does the internet work? And I want to tell a story of a Dutch town called Drachten, and I'm probably pronouncing it wrong, Drachten. And early in the 2000s, early 21st century, they had a pretty remarkable experiment. They decided that the town center, town has about 45,000 people living in it at the time, and they were having some traffic problems where they were having some accidents, and just generally it wasn't an overly safe place to drive. A lot of the town planners felt, goes the story. And so this man named Hans Monderman comes in. That's Hans right there, standing in front of one of his traffic engineering. He's a traffic expert. And he had this very radical notion that what if we were to go into Drachten and remove all the regulations? Take out the signs, take out the painted lines, take out the stoplights, take out stop signs, take out parking spaces, and make it a shared space, sort of like how we see traffic circles today. The idea was that if you take regulations away, that people might start to share the space with each other and not just use the space to get from point A to point B. And in doing that, Monderman thought that people would pay more attention to their surroundings. And in fact, if you click on this map, it's going to take you to a first-person perspective, and you can actually click around, and you can look around Drachten from the point of the traffic circle that Hans Monderman installed. So give it a shot, and you'll see what I'm talking about here. But for the presentation purpose, I'm going to go to a graphic here. How to build a better intersection. Chaos equals cooperation. If you remove the signs, what ends up happening is that the architecture of the road dictates traffic flow. So if you pull up into a traffic circle and there's no signs telling you what to do, you just have to go with the flow. Okay, so one of the things he thought we could do is let the natural form of the environment dictate people's behaviors. He also thought about things such as open spaces and sharing the road. So one of the things he encouraged was actually putting cafe tables with people sitting on them right next to the road and not having any curbs. Just having the sidewalk and the road be different colors. And this all sounds like ridiculously dangerous. You're thinking to yourself, if you're like me, I'm from St. Louis, Missouri, where traffic isn't that great to begin with, people are going to get murdered here. People need signs for direction. They need to be told where to go and be told how to behave. But do they really? So Monderman thought, if you put a family of 4 sitting at a cafe eating dinner right next to a traffic circle, your average pedestrian is going to see that family. They're going to slow down and pay attention. And instead of waiting for a green light or a red light to tell them when they can and can't go, they're going to wait till the coast is clear. I mean, how many times have you almost been in an accident because somebody ran a red light? They were trying to beat the light. Or how many times have you been rear-ended because the green light went and you didn't see it and the car behind you did, so because the car behind you saw green, they just stepped on the gas. A lot of our traffic accidents, Monderman argued, were because we don't share spaces. We look at spaces as ours, and we use the rules, the bureaucracy, to get through the space. And so, a much longer explanation of this, if you're interested, this link here is actually an English language download of Monderman's research, and I think it's pretty incredible. But what he basically argued is that when you have shared spaces, such as this traffic circle, the people in that space will self-organize. They will collectively pay attention to each other. And if everyone's paying attention to each other, we all tend to get what we need. This might sound crazy, but consider a cafeteria line. I think of the West Virginia University Mountain Layer, our main student union. There's no rule that says you have to stand in line to get a sandwich. I could walk over to the mountain layer, and I'm a professor, and I'm a fairly decent-sized guy. I could just push folks out of the way and grab a sandwich and pay for it and leave. And students could complain about it, but there's no rule against that. But why do we get in line? Why do we queue up for goods? Well, we queue up because we've recognized that if everybody stands in an orderly line, we will all eventually get our food in a reasonable amount of time. And oftentimes, if you look at public spaces, people will naturally queue up for things. You don't necessarily have to have the velvet ropes. In fact, when you have the velvet ropes, all that does is make us pay attention to the length of the line and where the line goes and my space in the line, rather than having me focus on everybody and getting all of us from point A to point B. Monderman's research was pretty successful, I believe. After he installed this traffic circle, accidents went down to, at 1 year, there was a single incidence of an accident in this town. And of course, there's a lot more at play there. There's many more variables at play. But the notion of this shared space, that we collectively share this environment, we all have a self-motivation to make the environment work, and so we take care of our part, it tends to do okay. So let's talk about this further. The internet. I showed you this map yesterday, my last presentation. What if we thought of the internet as a shared space where we all live? Wikipedia, right? Wikipedia is an online encyclopedia that is edited by the users of the encyclopedia. Well, we all have goals and agendas and biases and beliefs and opinions. And I could go right now on the Barack Obama webpage, and I could just say he is the worst president of all time, that he cheated on his wife, that he's a pot smoker, and all of these things. Or I could go on there and say he's the greatest president of all time. I could celebrate his praises. And both of those would be terrible encyclopedia entries. They would be subjective, they would be inaccurate, they would be biased, they would be persuasive. So why does Wikipedia allow me to do that? Well, the notion is that Wikipedia is a shared space. It is a community of users. It is a puzzle piece of users here. And each one of us adds a puzzle piece. And collectively, as we add puzzle pieces, edit puzzle pieces, correct old data, we start to tell a more holistic story. And if you take the average of all the people on Wikipedia and all of their shared opinions, facts, and beliefs, and they do have facts, they do have factual information. I saw Barack Obama eating a cheeseburger yesterday. That's a fact. Maybe it's just not a very important one. All of us use this information, and all of us edit the central server. And as we all start to use it, it gets monitored, it gets checked. And we realize that the point of this website is not for me to voice an opinion, it's for us to understand the many different features of our world, just like an encyclopedia in the 1950s. So, as fantastic as this is, because it should not work, it does work. The majority of research on Wikipedia shows that your average Wikipedia entry is at least as accurate as your average encyclopedia entry, like from a Britannica or a Merriam-Webster's or one of these companies. And in many cases, the Wikipedia entries get updated faster, and they get more accurate information, and they're often longer entries. So Wikipedia should not work, just like the traffic circle should not work, but it does. We understand that people do self-organize. We do learn how to share spaces. And we learn that sharing spaces actually benefits all of us at the end. And we can apply this to Facebook and Twitter and blogging and YouTube. These are all different shared spaces. When we go online and talk to each other, we're sharing those spaces. And the more we start to understand that, Monderman, the traffic expert, Jonathan Zittrain, the Harvard lawyer who studies new media, and all of us academics and professionals start, and even regular people in everyday life notice that this is a pretty good tool. It's the same reason your local park doesn't have trash all over it. You don't litter the park because you want to use it later. So we're trying to encourage the understanding and adoption of this notion of shared space. I believe Zittrain calls it a netizen, being a citizen of the internet. And it really does start to benefit us and work for us. So let's talk a little bit. For the discussions online, I want you to consider some viewpoints, and I want to expand upon them, because all I've done right now is given you some very basic background understandings. Let's go into more detail. Tell me, do you feel more or less connected online? Do you feel like your networks bring you closer to your people? Do they bring you away from your people? Do you want more or less connection? Let's talk about that. Why don't we talk about how you're using technologies to meet your goals in personal and professional life? Those information goals, those persuasion goals, those relationship goals and entertainment goals. Let's really start to look at how your usage of your goals, how your usage of technology satisfies your goals, and how that might affect other people's ability to satisfy these goals. And I really want to talk about this right here. Are you more or less connected? And finally, do you want to live in a shared space? This is a big question that I think gets overlooked when we talk about communication technology. You know, I might suggest we already do live in shared spaces. We live in an environment where we share with each other around us, whether we realize it or not. You know, perhaps we always lived in a shared space. From the very first villages of people, tribes and nomads that formed villages and stayed put and then finally started interacting. We realized early on in our evolution, in our social evolution, that we divide and conquer. That we're social creatures, and social creatures live in shared spaces, and I think we're all okay with that. Or rather, we've learned how it can benefit us, right? But now, space and time have collapsed, and we are aware of everybody. At the individual level, we understand the thoughts and the beliefs and even the behaviors of thousands upon thousands of people. Later on in our discussions, I'll talk about degrees of separation and how we've gotten to a point where our friends' can actually influence the way we see the world, because we just get so much information. And so what I might suggest is that why don't we consider this notion of what I might call ambient awareness. That is this notion that we sort of have a general understanding of our surrounding. It's always there, it's always around us. And our surrounding is no longer our space-time, but it's our social network. How are we coping with this? Dr. Cohen, at the end of our MOOC in week 4, is going to talk quite a bit. Dr. Elizabeth Cohen is going to talk about how we cope with overload. But I might even suggest we just think about how do we understand the way we know our world, when our world is no longer the physical space around us, but it might be the social space we occupy online that sort of replicates our social space offline. A lot of folks, for example, call Facebook a social Rolodex. Okay? So let's talk more. Just like last time, I want you to share your answers. Bring your own questions and commentary. I'm going to be at Bowman Spartan with the hashtag WVUCommMOOC. Of course, you can go to our discussion forums, which if you've registered for the classes, you can find on the MOOC website. If you're registered, you can just click here. It'll take you through the pages and go to week 1. If you're not registered, make sure you sign up for the classes so you can get into the discussion forums. Okay? And once we've done all this today, I want to let you know that tomorrow, 6 February, Wednesday, 6 February, I'm not going to be presenting any formal material, but rather I want to do a tweet up. So from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, I'm going to be on Twitter and on the discussion boards. I want you to tell me how you're feeling so far. We've covered some very basic stuff, and I need you to tell me what you want to hear next. So let's talk online. I'll be available for 2 hours in most of the day, and I will see you on the interwebs. Thank you so much for your time.